The lotus feet of our spiritual master are the only way by which we can attain pure devotion and service. I bow down to these lotus feet with great honor and reverence. By his grace one may cross the ocean of material suffering. Take the words of Krishna. My only wish is that I have consciousness purified by the word emanating from the lotus master. Attachment to the lotus feet is the perfection that fulfills all desires. He opens my darkened eyes and fills my heart with transcendental knowledge. He is my Lord, birth after birth. From him ecstatic prayer emanates. By him ignorance is destroyed. The Vedic scriptures sing of his character. Our spiritual master is the ocean of mercy, the friend of the poor and the Lord and master of the devotees. O Master, be merciful unto us. Give us the shape of your lotus feet. Make your fame be spread through all of the three worlds. Ja.
Canto 2, Chapter 9. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Janavallabha Girivaradhari Gopi Janavallabha Girivaradhari Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Nitai Gora Hari Bo Prabhupada, 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 Prabhupada. Jaya Jaya Prabhupada, 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 Prabhupada. Jaya Om Vishnupad Paramahamsara Jakachari Ashtotar Shishimas Divine Grace Abhay Charanaravinda Bhaktivedanta Goswami Maharaj Srila Prabhupada Ki ISKCON Sanstapakacharya Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Gaura Premanandi. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Sri Guru and Sri Gauranga. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Book? Okay. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Shri Shuka Uvacha. Shri Shuka Uvacha. Atma Mayam Arite Rajan. Atma Mayam Rite Rajan. Parasya Anubhava Atmana. Parasya Anubhava Atmana. Nam Gatetartha Sambandha. Nagatetartha Sambandha. Swapna Drashtur Ivagyasa. Evanjasa. Swapna Drashtur Ivajasa. Shri Shuka Uvacha. Atma Mayam Rite Rajan. Parasyanubhavatmanaha. Nagatetartha Sambandha. Swapnadrashtur Evanjasa. Shri Shuka Uvacha. Atma Mayam Rite Rajan. Parasyanubhavatmanaha. Nagatetartha Sambandha. Swapnadrashtur Evanjasa. Shri Shuka Uvacha. Atma Mayam Rite Rajan. Parasyanubhavatmanaha. Nagatetartha Sambandha. Swapnadrashtur Evanjasa. Shri Shuka Uvacha Atmamayamrite Rajan Parasyanubhavatmanaha Nagate Tartva Sambandha Swapna Drashturivanjasa. Shri Shuka Uvacha Atmamayamrite Rajan Parasyanubhavatmanaha Nagate Tartha Sambandha Swapna Drashturivanjasa. Shri Shuka Uvacha Atmamayamrite Rajan Parasyanubhavatmanaha Nagate Tartha Sambandha Swapna Drashturivanjasa. Shri Shuka Uvacha. Shri Shukadev Goswami said, Atma, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Mayam, energy. Rite, without. Rajan, O King. Parasya, of the pure soul. Anubhava Atmana, of the purely conscious. Na, never. Gateta, it can so happen. Artha, meaning. Sambandha, relation with the material body. Swapna, dream. Drashtu, of the seer. Iva, like. Anjasa, completely. Translation. Sri Shukadev Goswami said, O King, unless one is influenced by the energy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, there is no meaning to the relationship of the pure soul in pure consciousness with the material body. That relationship is just like a dreamer seeing his own body working. Please repeat. Sri Shukadev Goswami said, O King, unless one is influenced by the energy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, there is no meaning to the relationship of the pure soul in pure consciousness with the material body. That relationship is just like a dreamer's seeing his own body working. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. Maharaj Parikshit's question as to how a living entity began his material life, although he is apart from the material body and mind, is perfectly answered. The spirit soul is distinct from the material conception of his life, but he is absorbed in such a material conception because of being influenced by the external energy of the Lord called Atma Maya. This has already been explained in the first canto in connection with Vyasadev's realization of the Supreme Lord and his external energy. The external energy is controlled by the Lord, and the living entities are controlled by the external energy, by the will of the Lord. Therefore, although the living entity is purely conscious in his pure state, he is subordinate to the will of the Lord in being influenced by the external energy of the Lord. In the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 15, text 15, also the same thing is confirmed. The Lord is present within the heart of every living entity, and all the living entities' consciousness and forgetfulness are influenced by the Lord. Now the next question automatically made will be why the Lord influences the living entity to such consciousness and forgetfulness. The answer is that the Lord clearly wishes that every living entity be in his pure consciousness as a part and parcel of the Lord, and thus be engaged in the loving service of the Lord as he is constitutionally made. But because the living entity is partially independent also, he may not be willing to serve the Lord, but may try to become as independent as the Lord is. All the non-devotee living entities are desirous of becoming equally as powerful as the Lord, although they are not fit to become so. The living entities are illusioned by the will of the Lord because they wanted to become like him, like a person who thinks of becoming a king without possessing the necessary qualification. When the living entity desires to become the Lord himself, he is put in a condition of dreaming that he is a king. Therefore, the first sinful will of the living entity is to become the Lord. And the consequent will of the Lord is that the living entity forget his factual life and thus dream of the land of utopia where he may become one like the Lord. The child cries to have the moon from the mother, and the mother gives the child a mirror to satisfy the crying and disturbing child with the reflection of the moon. Similarly, the crying child of the Lord is given over to the reflection, the material world, to lord it over as karmi, and to give this up in frustration to become one with the Lord. Both these stages are dreaming illusions only. There is no necessity of tracing out the history of when the living entity desired this, but the fact is that as soon as he desired it, he was put under the control of Atma Maya by the direction of the Lord. Therefore, the living entity in his material condition is dreaming falsely that this is mine and this is I. The dream is that the conditioned soul thinks of his material body as I, or falsely thinks that he is the Lord and that everything in connection with that material body is mine. Thus only in dream does the misconception of I and mine persist life after life. This continues life after life as long as the living entity is not purely conscious of his identity as a subordinate part and parcel of the Lord. In his pure consciousness, however, there is no such misconceived dream. And in that pure conscious state, the living entity does not forget that he is never the Lord, but that he is eternally the servitor of the Lord in transcendental love. Shishuka uvacha atma maya mrite rajan parasyanu bhavatmanaha nagatetartha sambandha swapna drashtu ribanjasa. Sri Shukadev Goswami said, O King, unless one is influenced by the energy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, there is no meaning to the relationship of the pure soul in pure consciousness with the material body. That relationship is just like a dreamer seeing his own body working. Om Agyanatimarandasya Gyananjana Salakaya Chakshurinmritam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namah. This is another incredible verse and purport from Srila Prabhupada. And we're using it today as part of our study in Scientific Saturdays to look at the question of free will and conditioning. and how those two things work together. It's a tough subject, and it's not always easy to appreciate. How is it that we've got free will, but we're being controlled by Atma Maya, or controlled by the material energy? Now, there's also important aspects of this subject of free will, what it means for the individual entity. Each one of us as human beings say to have free will. And there is big debates from the scientists on this point, or many scientists. I can't lump them all in. But the difficulty is for those persons working in neuroscience and physics and biology and psychology, because they think that there is only the physical body, because they think that the brain is therefore responsible for making all the things we talk about in consciousness, they have a difficulty, because they cannot find anything in the brain responsible for consciousness. They cannot find anything in the brain that suggests there is an individual self, a person who is experiencing. Now that may sound ridiculous, because the most obvious thing in the world to everyone is that I am experiencing life, right? It's me. It's a thing I call me. But there's nothing in the brain that you can say, oh, that's responsible for you feeling me. So what do they conclude? If you can't find anything in the brain that is responsible for you being you, what do they suggest? You can't be you. Isn't that the most crazy way of deciding something? You know, we can't find it in the brain, therefore it can't exist. There's one philosopher called Galen Strawson who says, you know, there are many silly ideas in philosophy, lots of silly ideas. But perhaps the silliest of all is that consciousness doesn't exist. That's the silliest. Because it's the one thing that we all know is true. I am conscious. So if your study of the brain doesn't tell you how the brain produces consciousness, do you get rid of consciousness? Or do you get rid of the idea that the brain is maybe responsible? What you should do is revise your theory, revise your assumption, revise your bias, your prejudice, that we're going to find consciousness in the brain. We were listening to, in a little group we have, passing around a video of Susan Blackmore, quite famous in this field. Now, she is actually a Buddhist of some sort. And she likes this idea that you can't find the self in the brain, because that sort of goes along with her interpretation of Buddhism. Now, Buddhism is a complex philosophy, and it's got its different branches, and it's not clear that the Buddha said there's no self. But many followers of that consider that there is no individual self. Everything's just a flow of moments being experienced. So she was making the point, and very clearly, she said, all our intuition tells us that we are a self. It tells us, all our experience, everything, and even though we may try and move away from it, we still keep coming back to this point that I am an individual being consciously experiencing life. He says, but we got to get rid of that, because nothing in the brain can show us that. Therefore it can't be. This is the foolishness that we're having to cope with in our presentations of Krishna consciousness. Now, if you get rid of the self, another thing that you get rid of is free will. Are you all familiar what we mean by free will? Free will is basically the freedom to make choice. This is the dictionary definition. Freedom to make choices and determine what you want without any influence or coercion or being forced to by something else. Now, the physicalists will say there is no free will. Because they say if it's just neurons firing in the brain, they will be firing according to whatever is setting them off. You know, what is setting them off is inputs that they're getting from the senses. You see something, you hear something, that's going to go into the brain's going to make a reaction, it's going to decide what to do. And it'll pull up old memories and say, well, this is what we did last time. That worked, we'll do it again. That didn't work, we'll do something different. So they say the brain is making all your decisions. So you have no free will whatsoever. So there's no self, there's no free will. Now, can you imagine what a society that actually adopted that would be like? How would anyone ever be responsible for what they did? Can you imagine this Susan Blackmore? She's just gone and slaughtered a whole bunch of people, caught in the act, pulled up into court. And the judge said, so how do you plead? Not guilty. What do you mean not guilty? We have all the evidence. We have witnesses who saw you do it. We have all the evidence to show you killed these people. You know? Why do you say you didn't do it? Well, because there's no free will. And therefore I couldn't have made that decision. I'm not responsible for what my neurons do. And then she would say, and also, who is responsible? Because the self now is different from the self then. Whoever that self was only lasted as long as that happened. And it was replaced. Because at every moment you're a new self. Right? The argument that she uses is like this. That say you're sitting down here, you're in one type of mood and feeling, right? Now if I get you to stand up and jump around, you're going to be in a different feeling, aren't you? Therefore, two different people. Easy? No, it's daft. That is really stupid. No, you're the same person in this mood and in that mood. Yes, our moods change, our personality changes, our ideas change, our feelings change, our wants and dislikes change. But they're all ours. We were the constant factor throughout that all. That's the obvious conclusion. Otherwise, if I asked you, how did you enjoy breakfast? You'd say, oh, well, I wasn't there. I was another self who was eating at the time. I don't know. No idea. No idea what the experience was like. You know? What are you going to do in the future? I'm not going to exist. It won't be me. Who cares? It is such a foolish, foolish philosophy. And not only foolish, it's dangerous. If we actually adopted these ideas that there is no self, no free will, we'd be in such trouble. There could be no laws because there's no responsibility. The basis of responsibility is that you were the person who did this, and so the culpability, the blame for crimes can be done, and also because we believe that I will be around in the future, I'm willing to make plans for the betterment of myself and the world and everyone around me. So if I don't care what the future is, if it's not going to be me, then who? So, very foolish philosophy, very dangerous. But it's important. Now let's just look at how we have modelled consciousness. We have said that the Atma is the conscious entity. And we have a body. And the body has senses. The senses are getting information. That information, in physical terms, it is being processed by the brain. But more importantly, it is being processed by the mind. The mind is where the real processing happens. The mind is artificial consciousness. It mimics consciousness. It does the thinking, willing, and feeling. Now, I don't know if you had the same experience with reading, when Prabhupada says the mind does thinking, willing, and feeling. You kind of think, well, wait a minute, those sound like very conscious things, don't they? Willing, feeling, thinking. That sounds like what I as a conscious being does. Is the mind conscious? No. It is doing an imitation of thinking, willing, and feeling. But it is such a good imitation that we, as the conscious being, think that thinking is my thinking. That feeling that the mind has is my feeling. That willing that the mind has is my willing. And this is where we say the conditioned soul is conditioned. This is what we mean by conditioned. And it's serious. The physicalist will tell us that we have no free will and that everything is conditioned. Practically speaking, the Vedas are saying the same. That everything, practically everything in our material life is a conditioned response. There's very little of our free will actually being exercised in ordinary material life. And that's what this verse in purport is explaining. There is free will, but it exists at the level of the Atma. And the key aspect of free will is choosing whether I want to love Krishna or not. Love, again, is something that disappears as soon as you remove the self and you remove free will in the material world. What is love? What is kindness? What is compassion? All these things just disappear. Humanity, the whole basis of what we think of ourselves as human disappear by these stupid physicalist ideas. But there is a truth that we are conditioned. Because we are basically accepting whatever the mind comes up with as what we want. So the way if we can put it in simple terms, the way it happens is the spirit soul, the Atma, desires to be separate from Krishna. Krishna is giving him a playground, a dreamlike state, a virtual reality situation which we can explore. And the virtual reality metaphor works very well for this. It's a place where you just become absorbed and think of yourself in a different way. You don't recognize your original identity. You now think of this adopted artificial identity related to this body. And so that our will has brought us to this situation. And then what happens is our will gets wrapped up in the ahankara, the false ego. We have this idea of ourselves. And basically, the key idea is as explained here. We're an enjoying thing. We're no longer thinking of ourselves as a serving thing. We're now thinking of ourselves, I am an enjoying thing, as the false ego. I am independent. I exist for pleasure. Because my nature is Ananda. Sat Chit Ananda. That's the nature of consciousness. So therefore, I want to enjoy. And I tell my false ego, this is your mission. Get enjoyment. So the false ego then goes to Buddhi and says, all right, I need you to find enjoyment for me. Here are my preferences. Like you go on some websites and it asks you to list your preferences in order that it can suggest things to you, right? So that's what you do with intelligence, with Buddhi. You define your preferences, and it will be preferences in terms of how the modes work. They will be influenced by the modes. So then the mind, its job is to come up with stuff for you. So can you imagine if the idea is I want to enjoy, the message to Buddhi is get me some gratification. Get me something to enjoy. So the mind, intelligence is thinking, well, what sort of things do you normally enjoy? I'll have a word with the mind. The mind says, well, food often's a good one, isn't it? Most people enjoy food, This guy, I think that's worked in the past. So intelligence says, yep, okay, all right. Now, what sort of food ideas are you going to come up with? Well, I got a little sniff of something earlier. I think samosa would work. So intelligence is thinking, yes, I think we've had some good experiences on that in the past. False ego's listening in, going, yep, I think I like where this is all going. So intelligence says to mind, okay, work on that idea. So mind going, yeah, okay, samosa, all right. Well, we got to think it'll be a nice one. We'll do it with curd, and I like cauliflower. That works really well. Now, where are we going to get it from? That becomes the next question. And then desires turn into plans, turn into strategies, and the whole time the soul is going, yeah, this is all fine, So wherever these desires take us, we just go with. We're just captivated by it. Why? Because of Atma Maya. We are under that material energy. And we are seeing ourselves swapna drashta, as if in a dream. It's this bewildering. How many of you have actually tried on these kind of VR goggles in a virtual reality experience? Anyone? Gaming? I have no interest in gaming, never was any good at playing things. But I had an experience of it. The architects who are designing the extension of our new temple in Cardiff had worked up all the plans, and they had turned the plans into a virtual reality experience. Far out, it was amazing. So put on the goggles, and you're looking around and you're seeing the new temple room. Wow, and we could move within the building, upstairs or, in different, and you're just standing in the one place, but you're kind of going all around this new building, going, wow, completely absorbing. And then at one point, I was the only person with the goggles on, so the architect was talking to one of the devotees near me, so I could hear these voices speaking, and I turned round with the goggles on, expecting to see them. Completely daft. They're not there in the virtual reality thing. But I turned, no, they're not. Where are they? I had to remind myself that no, I wasn't there in the real room. I was actually in this make-believe illusion. It's so bewildering. And actually there are many things that the neuroscientists do to show how easily we are fooled. You ever heard of the rubber hand experiment? We did this at Janmashtami one year. We set up a table where there was a little screen and people put their arms out like this, you see. But they don't get to see this hand. It's covered behind a screen. What they see beside it is a rubber hand sticking out from a cloth. So it kind of looks like it's in the place where their hand might be. And then we kind of, caress this with a little brush. This hand, which is the real hand, right? Do that for a while. And then we get the hammer and go on the rubber hand, and they go, ah! Because they now identify that one as actually. So you brush both hands, so that they think that this hand is actually my real one. And there's lots of experiments like that. There's ways in which you can take a video of a person from behind and project it in front of them. Therefore, they think I'm over there. So the neuroscientists just say this is how easily we are confused. That means, you can't believe in anything your brain tells you. Yeah, in one sense, that's true. You actually have to understand how heavily conditioned you are. How strong the conditioning of the material energy is. So much so that you're willing to accept the dream of the material world as real. You've come, you've got your new avatar, this material body. You're interacting with others around, and you think they're real, but they're just avatars also. And are we actually getting to know the real person? Or are we just dealing avatar to avatar? Like in a game, you're meeting all sorts of characters. You don't know who they are in real life, what they're actually like. But they've dressed themselves up, as some hero or some gamer or whatever it is. So we never actually get to connect deeply on a soul-to-soul level in the material world generally. As devotees, we have the chance. And the reason is this verse, Pandita Samadarshana. That the sage, Vidya Vinaya Sampane, the humble and learned sage, sees with equal vision all these different creatures. The dog, the elephant, the cow, the Brahman, the dog eater. Sees all these differently. Why? Because he's seeing the soul and the Paramatma present within each of them. Sees beyond the avatar, sees beyond the externals, sees beyond the illusion, and actually sees the individuals. Some philosophers claim that we will never be able to understand other people's consciousness and who they are. But actually the Gita says, no, you can. Through the transcendental process of purifying your consciousness, you will actually be able to see the consciousness of others in its real form. So these aspects of conditioning are very powerful, but it never takes away from free will. In the material world, we don't exercise very much free will. Practically all our desires, all our thoughts are conditioned by the way the modes are controlling our mind and intelligence. It's so strong. But it's not that we have no free will. There's always the opportunity for the soul to exercise its ultimate will of turning to Krishna. Even when we're not turning to Krishna, we're exercising free will. That's the point. As this verse says, we're independent. Svarat, in the first verse of the Bhagavatam, the nature of the absolute truth is revealed as Svarat, independent. Swa, oneself. Rat means dominating, controlling. It's like lordship, king, Raj. So Swarat indicates that one has one's own lordship. So That is the independence that we have. Krishna has it, and we, as Vibhanangsha expansions of Krishna, also have this independence. Now, independence and free will doesn't mean you get to do whatever you like. Achieving all your desires and having desires and achieving those desires are two different things. Isn't it? You know, people say, well, how can we have free will if, you know, we never get what we want? You know, the free will was in the wanting of it, not the fulfillment of it. You know, we have free will, but we're not powerful in even getting what we want. We're not even powerful in generating the illusion that we want. We rely entirely on Krishna, and that's what this verse is saying. That even to enjoy separately from Krishna, you're relying entirely on Krishna, making that arrangement for you. That's the amazing thing. That even when we want to be independent, Krishna is the one who fulfills that independent desire and sets it all up. So, will, in our terms, is that I'm a conscious being. I have experiences. And my will is intended to enhance my experiences. That's what it's. I have a wish to vary, to improve, to enhance the quality of all my experiences. That's how we're defining will. How that gets fulfilled will be up to many different factors, including our karma and the circumstances and everything else like that. That is emanating from the Atma. Will belongs to the Atma. Because will cannot be conditioned. It cannot be forced on us. It cannot be influenced. Now, Krishna does not try to change our will. Not exactly. Krishna is very clever. He's not going to force you to love him, because then it wouldn't be love. He's not going to create circumstances where that's your only opportunity. Your only option is to love. No, that wouldn't be love either. He's not programming us to love him. He's programming us to make the choice. But at the same time, Krishna has his own will. And his will is that he would really like us back in a relationship with him. But he knows that for the moment, we've got other ideas. So there's a nice setup of the material world. And the material world is worked in such a way as to give us the opportunity to explore every option of independence, every type of enjoyment, every type of situation, being the controller, being the creator, being, one with God even. Every option is there, as Prabhupada explains in this. So, giving us all those options and helping us work through all our wayward desires is kind of Krishna's kindness. But will gives rise to what we call volition. Volition means that volition is the faculty of using one's will. Now, this is going to lead into the next section of our Scientific Saturdays, which I think is a very interesting one. Because this is now saying, well, what level of agency does the soul have in the material world? We are described, and we've talked about this, we are described as hetu. We are causal. We have agency. That ability to, being causal means we have desires and we want things to change. We have volition. though that volition is going to be fulfilled by Krishna, but because Krishna is willing to fulfill our volition, therefore we have responsibility, we have agency, we are the cause of things happening for us. We can't blame anyone else, we've only ourselves to take responsibility. So this is the kind of this aspect of being in the material world and having volition and having desires and wanting to see things happen. This creates a flow of information. We have described that the whole material world is basically energy and information. When we observe the world, we are receiving a flow of information from it to ourselves. When we want to do stuff, technically what we're doing is implementing a flow of information to our working senses, engaging with the world, trying to do stuff. Volition is very strong. In the spiritual world, basically all that's at work there is volition, our desires. The soul simply desires to serve Krishna in various ways, and Yoga Maya. It's also an Atma Mayam. It's an energy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. But it is his internal potency. It is working to fulfill the desires of the devotees of Krishna with Krishna, and to help manifest all the incredible pastimes. In the material world, the same process is sort of at work for us, but it is not being fulfilled by Yoga Maya. It is actually, in order to distinguish its effect on us and its lack of direct service to Krishna, the understanding is that this is being carried out by another of Krishna's energies, the Bahiranga Shakti, the external energy, Durga Devi. So that sets up our dreaming state. So just to kind of conclude, is that free will is real. It belongs to the soul. But when the soul is in material life, basically what makes up our hopes, desires, our aspirations, and all the things we want is really generated for us by the mind, according to the preferences that we have set, how we have set our intelligence to guide the mind. And that in those preferences that we have set for the intelligence are arising from the ahankara concept that we have of ourselves and the way we want to experience and enjoy life. So, practically speaking, everything we experience in the material life is conditioned. So here's a little phrase for you. We have much more free will than we think we have, but we use much less free will than we think we do. Let's unpack that one. This applies to material life. Devotees are coming out of this thing. Devotees begin to realize that they have more free will than they thought they had. Because if you think everything is conditioned, you ultimately have the ultimate free will in your